Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to talk about overcoming fear. And now by saying that I know that Frog Machine is going to be like, you learned nothing. Now, the point of this video is not to explain how to repress fear, how to overcome fear. I titled it that because that is the wrong way to think about fear. Just the fact that you are interested in trying to overcome fear, alleviate fear, get rid of fear is a very negative thought process. It's not the way that you should think about fear. Emotions are what they are. You have to accept them and move forward with them. This is a really, really important principle. Um, because it basically, if you constantly try to overcome fear, try to avoid fear, try to alleviate fear, you allow the fear to control you. Let's think about this in terms of something that I find to be really prevalent in my own life. It's this sort of fear of going up and like introducing myself to random girls that I don't know. Now, what I tend to do is when I see a girl and I'm going to approach her, I tend to feel this emotion of fear. Now, my first thought process after that, a lot of the time, is no, get rid of this fear. How am I going to get rid of this fear? I need to become confident again. I need to alleviate this fear as quick as possible. And ultimately, what I end up doing is entering these sort of thought processes where I just say, "Oh, you don't need to talk to her. It's okay. You'll find another girl eventually. You don't need to talk to this one." And then it basically leads me not taking action in this sense, and it has a really destructive effect on my life. So this attempt to sort of overcome fear ultimately lets the fear control me. It lets this sort of fear of introducing myself to women I don't know or attractive women I don't know. It lets that fear control me and basically make me not go and talk to these women. When actually what you should do is not repress, because repression is basically the same as emotionalism in this sense, is basically allowing your fear to control you, allowing the fact that you are afraid of this moment to control your actions here. It makes you afraid of fear essentially, and you try to repress that fear. You try to alleviate that fear, and by doing so, you enter these really bad habits. You have really terrible actions that are detrimental to your own life. The key here with this emotional state is to sort of disconnect these emotions from who you are. These emotions don't define you. This fear can't define you. Emotionalism is when you emotionalism would be if you let this fear control you. If you let this fear or emotionalism would be like, I'm afraid of going to talk to this woman, so I'm not going to talk to her. While repression would be, I'm afraid of going to talk to this woman, so I'm going to try to repress this fear as quick as possible. And to repress this fear, I'm going to not go talk to this woman and enter these sort of thought processes. So the end result is ultimately the same. But there is a distinction between these two actions because, I hope you can kind of see the distinction I'm trying to make between the two. But what in a non-emotionalist and a non-repressive person, an objectivist, would do with regards to emotions would be realize that these emotions don't define you. They're part of your mind, but they're not a defining feature on how you should act. Objectivists believe in free will. Free will is important in this regard. You don't have to listen to your emotions. You don't have to deal with your emotions. Well, you have to deal with your emotions, but you have to. You can't try to suppress them. You can't deal with them in the sense of repressing them. You have to basically deal with the emotion by accepting it to its fullest extent. Realize that this is the emotion that I'm feeling. Identify it. Say, I am afraid of going to talk to this woman. And then you go and do it anyways. You basically disconnect your consciousness, disconnect your action from that emotion, and you just go and do it anyways. You have to. It's a lot easier to go and do this sort of thing when you accept that you're afraid. When you accept that you're afraid, you are sort of living in reality in that sense. You actually understand what emotions you're feeling, and if you're okay with that, if you're say, I'm afraid, but that's okay, it's a lot easier to go and just go talk to somebody, go talk to this girl, and I think that's a common experience. I think most people are afraid of that sort of thing. So it's not this sort of like unusual thing to be afraid of going and doing this, and where you need to be this sort of macho man sort of epitome of what masculinity is supposed to be, where you're not afraid at all and you just confidently go and talk to these women and not care at all. Like that's not how it's going to be. You're going to be afraid. This is like an unknown person, someone you don't know, and it's okay to be afraid. That's a very, very important thing. Fear is not something to be afraid of. You should not be afraid of fear, because that leads you to wanting to repress it, and it leads you to ultimately letting the fear control you. Fear as an emotion is this sort of, it's sort of this underlying sort of thing. It's this thing, when you can't identify the fact that you're afraid, the fear controls you even more. It's sort of this, like when you don't know that you're afraid, it's, you're a lot more afraid, because fear is very much related to the unknown. Fear is very much related to like uncertainty. That's a big aspect of it. And when you're uncertain of the fact that you're afraid, and when you don't identify that explicitly and fully experience that emotion, you become even more afraid of it. And it starts to become this sort of underlying thing overall in your life. And it controls you when you repress it. It really does. It absolutely controls you when you repress it. So you need to experience it, but don't become an emotionalist where you also let the experiencing of your emotion control you, where you basically say, oh, because I experienced this fear, I'm not going to go and talk to her just because I'm afraid. That would be emotionalism from my understanding. But don't repress it either. Repression I think is a lot more common with objectivists, at least, because objectivists are generally decent at not letting their emotions completely control them, but objectivists tend to be bad with repression. I experienced that, and I'm still trying to overcome that. But it ultimately does lead you to being sort of an emotionalist too when you're repressive, because you let those emotions control you in that same sort of sense. But yeah, just the key is to disconnect your consciousness, your action, yourself from your emotions. You are not your emotions. That's a very, very important thing. That's extremely important here. You need to not let your emotions be this sort of defining thing on who you are. They are part of you, but they aren't you. And you can't let that control you. You can't let a fear of fear control you. I'd highly recommend watching Frog Machine's videos on things like this, because Frog is really good at explaining things related to emotions, and I'd especially recommend my conversation with Frog, because we talk about a lot of the stuff that I've talked about in this video, and we go kind of in depth, and I really explore my subconscious and explore a lot of the things in that video, a lot of things related to this topic in that video. And it's basically a huge learning experience for me, because it's really easy to accept objectivism, to understand the philosophy. It's not that hard to learn it, but the hardest part is I guess it's hard to learn it. I'm not gonna talk shit on people who know the philosophy, because it's a difficult, complicated, good philosophy. But the hardest part, I think, of the philosophy is actually applying it to life. But that's the whole point of the philosophy too. You can know the philosophy letter by letter. You can know every single word in the philosophy, but if you don't apply it to your life, you will not be happy. You will never be happy. That's so important. I think that's one of the most important things to know in this regard. So yeah, for the question that I kind of opened this video up with, and that I'm going to title the video, how do you overcome fear? You stop thinking about it in terms of something that you must overcome. It's so much easier when you just accept the fact that you're afraid, and just accept your emotions in general, and basically separate them from your consciousness. Know that they don't define you, and don't use them as guides to action. Use your own rational faculty as your guide to action. Your emotions should not guide your actions. But yeah, I think that is all I have to say for today. If I said anything incorrect in this video, feel free to correct me. And yeah, because a lot of this is new for me. A lot of this is me trying really hard to apply the philosophy and explain it better, and making sure that I have a good grasp on everything that Frog talked to me about and things that I've just learned from him over time. I think I explained them fairly well in this video. But feel free to correct anything I did wrong here. Yeah. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Peace.